They were a loving couple living the American dream.
They came to America seeking stability, seeking success.
They really had to hustle and work hard.
They made a better life for themselves.
Until a horrible crime destroyed everything they held dear.
Get out of my house.
Somebody's in the house.
She can hear her husband. He's screaming.
This was a really traumatizing situation.
He was badly beaten.
There's a lot of blood.
This had to be her worst nightmare.
Was the horrific attack a home invasion?
Someone jimmied the locks.
The house looks ransacked.
Or does this happy couple have deadly secrets?
Someone was skimming money from the landscaping business.
You started to hear about affairs.
It was a casual fling.
They said that was the motive for murder.
December 29th, 2009. It's the dead of night in Lithonia, Georgia, a peaceful community 30 miles east of Atlanta.
Lithonia is a small country town turned bedroom community.
It's a quiet place where people come to buy a home and get away from the city.
But even in the sleepiest suburb, safety isn't guaranteed.
At 2 a.m., the Cab 911 received a frantic phone call from a homeowner.
The caller is 48-year-old Pamela Ballin.
Cab County 911.
It sounds like somebody's in the house.
She heard ransacking throughout the house. Lots of loud noises, things falling, things being broken.
Tell me, where are you at in the house, ma'am?
Closet.
You're in the closet?
But a panicked Pamela tells the dispatcher that she's terrified for her husband, 53-year-old Ricky Ballin.
Where's your husband at, ma'am?
I don't know, right?
She said she heard her husband fighting with an intruder.
Somebody was hitting on him.
She also hears him say, "Gun, get a gun, get a gun."
But scared for her life, Pamela instead hid in the closet to call for help.
Do you still hear voices in the house?
But Pamela tells the dispatcher she does hear someone.
What did you hear?
My husband calling for me.
Her husband was downstairs calling for help.
I should go downstairs.
No, ma'am. Just stay where you are.
Originally from the island of Jamaica, Pamela and Ricky Ballin came to America in 1984.
They'd just gotten married and were excited to start a family together.
They decided it would be best to migrate to America.
Like a lot of immigrants, Pamela and Ricky had to hustle to establish themselves.
They settled in Lithonia, a quiet suburb of Atlanta, which seemed like the perfect place to raise a family.
Pamela was able to find a job as a travel agent. And then Ricky, he was basically taking any job that he could get his hands on.
It was a constant scramble to make ends meet. But the couple was determined to build a better life for themselves and their children.
Derek Jr. had been born shortly after the family arrived in the States.
Ricky also had an older son named David from a previous relationship.
Although born in Jamaica, David was living in Boston with his mom.
He was able to come down for summers to visit with his father, Ricky, his stepmother, and his younger brother.
And by the time they were teenagers, both boys were busy helping their father.
Ricky had always dreamed of owning his own business, and before long, he had established his own landscaping company.
It was small to begin with, but Ricky really hustled hard.
He did quality work and had a great reputation.
And as suburban Atlanta boomed, so did Ricky's business.
More houses meant more yards needed landscaping, and Ricky was right on it.
Before long, Ricky was able to buy more moors He hired workers to add additional trucks and crews and was able to bid on much larger projects.
His business began to really take off.
Eventually, they were able to enjoy all of the benefits of middle-class success.
The couple bought a big, beautiful home.
They were able to live well, send their kids to good schools, travel.
All the while, Ricky's business kept growing.
The projects were getting bigger and bigger.
Ricky found himself landing six-figure commercial landscaping contracts.
Pamela quit her job and she joined her husband's company.
Ricky and Pamela really worked well together as a team.
Ricky was the front man who was out there handling the crews and handling the projects. Pamela was behind the scenes handling the books and helping to run the business.
And by 2009, the Ballins were an American success story.
Ricky and Pamela were proud of what they had built together.
But now a horrific crime threatens to tear it all apart. On December 29, 2009, Lithonia 911 has just received a terrified call from Pamela.
Pamela had just called 911 to report what sounded like a break-in.
She can hear what sounds like a struggle happening downstairs. Her husband fighting with the intruder.
Even more terrifying, Pam says she can hear Ricky calling out for help.
You think I should go downstairs to my
No,
husband?
ma'am.
The dispatcher warns her that the intruder may still be in the house.
Wait until the officer clears the location.
That had to be so terrifying for her, knowing something is going on with her husband and not being able to respond or react for fear of something happening to her.
She spends a majority of the 911 call pleading with the dispatcher to allow her to go check on him.
I need to go downstairs.
Stay where you are.
After several agonizing minutes, police arrive on the scene.
The front door was locked, and despite the situation, officers didn't break it down.
Then after urging her to stay put, the dispatcher asked her to go downstairs to let in the police.
Stay on the phone with me and go and get the door.
Are you sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Still on the line with the operator, Pamela heads downstairs.
She breaks down completely as she lets the officers inside.
The police find Ricky lying on the foyer floor.
There's a lot of blood. It's just a total mess.
It's a wife's worst nightmare.
With a successful landscaping business and a beautiful suburban home, immigrants Ricky and Pamela Ballin were an American success story.
By the end of 2009, Ricky and Pamela were really proud of what they had accomplished.
It wasn't easy. It required a lot of hard work, but they had built a life here in America.
Only now their American dream has turned into a nightmare.
Pamela just called 911 to report what sounds like a burglary in progress.
She believed Ricky had tried to fight off the intruder.
As she went downstairs to let the officers in, she saw her husband's bloody body lying next to the front door.
Ricky's badly beaten, and he's bleeding profusely from the head.
Imagine going downstairs and seeing your husband almost near to death.
Once Pamela's safely outside, officers sweep the house for the intruder.
The intruder apparently left the scene, but the house is ransacked.
Once the house was cleared, EMTs transport Ricky to the hospital.
Ricky was in really bad shape. He was non-communicative.
He is clinging to life.
As they load him into the ambulance, Pamela tries to climb on board, too.
Pamela was insistent that she get inside.
But detectives arrived on the scene, and they asked Pamela to wait to give them a statement.
Look, ma'am, I know you want to go be with your husband, but we really need to...
She was on the scene when the break-in occurred. So unless Ricky survives, she's their best witness.
I'll do what I can, but I really didn't see anything.
They asked her a lot of questions. She was cooperative.
According to Pamela, the night started off unexceptionally.
She said she had gotten home from the gym. Ricky was sitting in his favorite chair, surfing the internet.
You coming up to bed?
I'll be up in a minute.
Okay, I'm gonna go get that shower.
Pam said Ricky was still in his chair when she went upstairs.
She went to shower and she went to bed.
But Pamela says she woke up around 2 a.m.
She didn't know why she'd woken up, but when she did, Ricky wasn't in bed.
That was not unusual for him, because he kept real late hours. He liked to watch TV.
Once awake, Pamela says she'd gotten up and gone to the bathroom.
She's in there for a while when she starts hearing sounds.
What kind of sounds?
Sounds like something moving around downstairs.
Someone other than Ricky.
She says she heard Ricky say to someone, "Who are you? What are you doing here?"
That made her believe that there was an intruder in the house.
And according to Pamela, what Ricky said next erased any doubt.
She says she heard Ricky yell up to her to go get the gun.
Ricky wanted me to get the gun. He keeps it in the nightstand by the bed.
But you didn't get it?
No, I was too afraid.
She cheerfully admitted that she should have gotten the gun, but she was too afraid.
She instead locked herself in the bedroom.
Pamela says that as she huddled in the bathroom, Ricky had apparently tried to fight off the intruder.
Pam said that that's when she heard the crashing and the banging downstairs, like there was some kind of struggle.
She said she wasn't entirely sure how long she had stayed hidden in the bathroom.
It could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 10 minutes. She was too terrified to note.
I was too afraid, thinking they were gonna come up there and find me. They? So there was more than one intruder? I don't know, maybe?
She says that she heard ransacking throughout the house. Lots of loud noises, things falling, things being broken.
Until, according to Pamela, the noises suddenly stopped.
She heard it get quiet downstairs, and she thought that that was an opportunity to dash to the bedroom, get the phone, and call 911.
Even though she didn't hear anyone, Pamela was scared the intruders were still in the house, so she hid in the closet and called for help.
Pamela says it was while on the phone with 911 that she heard a new, horrifying sound.
She can hear Ricky faintly calling out for her.
Pam begins desperately pleading with the dispatcher to allow her to go check on her husband.
Ricky was calling for me, and I told her I should go down there and help him.
But the dispatcher says, "No, stay where you are, where it's safe."
She said she hadn't gone back downstairs until the police arrived.
She saw Ricky lying on the foyer floor.
I should have came down sooner.
She feels very guilty.
In hindsight, she should have gotten the gun, but she was too afraid.
It was a traumatic situation, to be sure.
This must have been her worst nightmare.
And it was about to get worse.
Just as Pamela was finishing her statement, the detectives got an urgent call from the hospital.
I should have came down sooner.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Pam, you need to go to the hospital.
Oh my God.
If she wants to see Ricky one last time, she better get to the hospital.
According to research released by the U.S. Department of Justice, there are an estimated 2.5 million burglaries nationwide each year. Of these, 66% are home invasions, but only 13% lead to an arrest due to lack of witnesses or physical evidence. While talking to detectives about the apparent home invasion and vicious assault on her husband, Ricky, Pamela Ballin has just received horrific news.
Pam learns that if she wants to see Ricky one last time, she has to get to the hospital immediately.
A neighbor drives the distraught Pamela to Atlanta's Grady Memorial Hospital.
Grady is the premier trauma center in the region. Grady has a reputation for saving people.
But there's nothing they can do for Ricky.
When Pamela arrives at the hospital, she receives notice that there is no hope for Ricky's recovery.
Ricky was struck in the head with a blunt object. He's essentially brain dead.
He could survive indefinitely on life support, but he will never regain consciousness.
When Pamela and Ricky's son, Derek Jr., arrive at the hospital, he and his mother face a difficult choice.
Pam knew that quality of life was really important. And at that moment, she had to decide whether or not she would make her husband live an existence that wasn't consistent with the man that he was, just for her sake, because she wanted him around. And she chose to let him go.
It wasn't just Pamela's decision, it was Pamela and their adult son's decision to ask that no further resuscitative means be utilized.
For detectives at the crime scene, it means their investigation will soon be upgraded to a homicide. And the evidence points to a likely motive.
Based on the scene, police were thinking that this started out as a robbery.
The house was ransacked.
There was furniture everywhere, drawers poured out.
Pictures hanging off the wall, broken glass pieces on the floor.
The Christmas tree was turned over.
They also found blood spatter all throughout the first floor, so it looks like there was a knockdown, drag-out struggle.
In the foyer, near where the killer left Ricky for dead, detectives also find what they believe to be the murder weapon.
Not far from the foyer, there was a decorative statue that was smeared with blood, and it appeared heavy enough and solid enough to have caused Ricky's injuries.
Finally, at the back of the house, detectives find where the intruders apparently made entry.
They find pry marks on the back door.
The intruder apparently jimmied the lock.
It appeared the person had planned to slip in and out quietly while everyone was asleep.
They didn't expect anyone to be downstairs.
Based on all the signs, his death appears to be the result of a burglary gone wrong.
Except there's one thing that doesn't add up.
Nothing appears to be missing.
The TV, the jewelry, the cash, the valuables, they were still there in plain sight.
Which naturally raises questions for detectives.
Had the killer or the thieves lost their nerve? Or had the crime scene been staged to look like a robbery to cover Ricky's murder?
Looking for answers, police canvass the area and speak with the Ballins' neighbors.
The neighbors are obviously upset and scared because things like this don't happen in this type of neighborhood.
Did you see or hear?
Lithonia, the crime rate is considerably low compared to Atlanta, Fulton County, or Gwinnett County.
Neighbors were especially horrified that something like this had happened to the Ballins.
Everyone the detective spoke with said that Pamela and Ricky were nice neighbors and a great couple.
People knew them as hardworking people. They were nice people and were very shocked that this happened.
Neighbors have no idea who would want to hurt Ricky.
Nor had anyone witnessed anything suspicious in the neighborhood that night.
No one has heard anything. No one saw anything.
Although one neighbor says she did observe something odd recently.
One neighbor said that she noticed a strange vehicle, a black SUV, parked across from the Ballins' home on several occasions.
She said it was almost as if someone was watching the Ballins' house.
The detectives wondered if Ricky was having trouble with someone that the neighbors might not have known about.
Could he have been in debt to someone? Was he dealing with a disgruntled employee? Or really, it could be anyone.
As the sun rises and detectives head back to the station, it isn't long before they get the news they'd been anticipating.
At about 10 a.m. that morning, Ricky dies.
With the clock ticking now to find Ricky's murderer, Investigators waste no time inviting Pamela down to the station to give a formal statement.
Thank you for coming in. I know this is a difficult time for you.
Pamela was still very upset, and she seemed shocked that anyone would want to break in their home and harm Ricky.
I thought this was just a burglary.
Well, that's what we're trying to find out.
Pamela told detectives that as far as she knew, Ricky didn't have any enemies.
Was he having any problems with the business?
No.
However, there's one other possibility that detectives will need to rule out.
They started asking her questions about whether she had been seeing anyone, whether Ricky had been seeing anyone. A lot of personal questions.
No. Everything was fine.
Pamela also says she has no idea who might be in the black SUV a neighbor spotted lurking around the house in the days leading up to the murder.
No, I don't know anything about that.
But while Pamela's statement offers no new leads for detectives,
Hi, Derek.
Pamela and Ricky's son, Derek Jr.'s, does.
There's something about my dad y'all probably need to know about.
He says that detectives should talk to his dad's girlfriend.
His girlfriend?
Yeah. He tells authorities that his father had been having an affair.
Pamela and Ricky Ballin's son, Derek Jr., has just revealed to detectives that his father may have been having an affair at the time of his death.
According to his son, the woman that his dad had been having an affair with was an Atlanta woman by the name of Carolyn Hodges.
She's an old family friend that Ricky had run into at a family funeral.
How do you know he was having an affair?
He wasn't exactly discreet.
Derek says that he overheard his dad chatting with the woman on the phone on several occasions.
Now, did your mom know about his girlfriend?
I tried to tell her.
Derek Jr. told police that his mom didn't believe it and didn't want to hear it.
The detectives are definitely interested, though.
Maybe the mistress was angry that Ricky wasn't giving her what she wanted.
All right, I'll walk you out.
Attempting to confirm whether Ricky was truly having an affair, investigators pull his phone records.
What they discover is several late-night phone calls that trace back to Carolyn Hodges.
There was even a phone call the night of the incident between Ricky and this woman.
However, when detectives bring Caroline in for questioning, she says that was no affair.
She says that she and Ricky were merely old friends.
She admits that her and Ricky did talk on the phone quite often. She said it was just catching up at first, and ultimately it led to Ricky talking to her because he wanted her advice.
Advice about what?
Well, he and Pam were going through a rough patch.
What did you say?
According to Caroline, it was Pam, not Ricky, who had been having the affair.
She said that Ricky found out he just didn't know what to do about it.
No.
Caroline says that Pam's boyfriend was a police officer named Antonio Vargas.
According to Carolyn, Antonio and Pam go to the same gym. And when Ricky found out about the affair, he was very upset.
But she says he also blamed himself.
He had been so focused on his business and working long hours.
I told him talk to Pam about it.
Well, did he follow your advice?
Yes.
Ricky had confronted Pam about the affair, and she had broken things off with Vargas.
Her and Ricky had reconciled and were going to do their best to make the most of it.
If Caroline's telling the truth, detectives see a few possibilities.
Vargas was angry about the breakup. Did he possibly seek revenge by killing Ricky?
Or maybe Pam hadn't really ended things with Vargas.
Maybe they were plotting together to remove Ricky from the pictures so that they could be together.
Or could the most likely scenario be that Caroline was pointing the finger at Pam to throw detectives off her track?
Maybe she wanted to be more than friends with Ricky and gotten angry when he rejected her.
However, a quick check of Caroline's phone records rules her out as a suspect.
According to her cell phone records, she had called Ricky from her sister's house in North Carolina.
There's no way that she could have committed the crime.
What's more, it appears there may be something to Caroline's story about Antonio Vargas.
They determined that he owned an SUV that was similar to the SUV that neighbors reported that was lurking in the neighborhood.
Was it possible that Vargas had been scoping out the scene?
But if that was the case, why didn't Pamela say anything when detectives brought it up with her? When investigators bring Antonio in for questioning, he doesn't deny the affair.
We just met at the gym. You know, one thing leads to another.
He said she felt neglected by her husband, so he was more than happy to step in.
You still seeing her?
Nah, we just hooked up a few times.
He characterizes it as just a fling.
One thing leads to another.
He says that he really didn't care whether or not she reconciled with her husband.
That's when investigators confront him about the black SUV.
Then why are you hanging around her place?
What are you talking about?
He denies that it was his SUV in the neighborhood.
Look, if an SUV looks like mine, it's just a coincidence.
Antonio also denies having anything to do with Ricky's death.
When he was asked what he was doing the night of the murder, he said he was working.
A quick check with the Atlanta police appears to confirm Antonio's alibi.
He was on duty at the time of the murder and had answered a call a half hour away from the crime scene.
They ruled him out as a suspect.
It looks as if the investigation is at a dead end. Until Ricky's son, David, arrives from Boston with new information for detectives.
There's something you ought to know.
Well, tell us.
He tells the detectives that his father was furious over the fact that she was skimming money from the landscaping business.
David says it all started when his father asked Pamela to take over running things in the office.
He preferred to be physically on the job site and doing the hands-on work.
However, according to David, trouble soon surfaced.
When he did check the books, he noticed what he thought were some irregularities.
He talked to her about it? Yeah.
David stated his stepmom assured Ricky that it was no big deal. She just had different ways of doing things than what he was used to.
David said that his father had bought Pam's excuses at first.
David says that things eventually came to a head when his dad started having trouble paying the company's bills and meeting payroll.
Hey, this doesn't make sense. What's going on with the money?
Ricky, I've told you where the money is going.
I can't even pay the employees.
David said his dad was so upset that he was about to open up a separate bank account that Pam wouldn't have access to.
According to David, Ricky was so fed up, he was ready to file for divorce.
Well, do you know who was handling your dad's divorce?
Well, I'm not sure he'd gotten that far.
Ricky had not filed for divorce or actually reached out to an attorney. The detectives only had David's word for it.
But when police start digging deeper into the Ballins' marriage, they discover that Pamela may have had a bigger motive than anyone imagined.
There was a life insurance policy with Pamela as the beneficiary.
Shortly before his murder, Ricky had drastically increased his life insurance coverage.
Pamela stood to gain more than $1 million from her husband's death.
DeKalb County detectives have just discovered that Pamela Ballin may have had a powerful motive to murder her husband, Ricky.
Prior to Ricky's murder, his life insurance policy had been drastically increased.
Pamela stood to gain more than $1 million from her husband's death.
The landscaping business, their big, beautiful home, all of their assets, and everything that they owned would be hers and hers alone.
But according to her stepson, David, the window for Pamela to collect had been closing fast.
According to David, Ricky was ready to file for divorce.
But before he could even file for a divorce or consult a lawyer, he was murdered.
Did that mean Pamela had killed him? Detectives suspect that's the case, but they have little proof.
There was no forensic evidence tying Pamela to the murder.
With their hands tied, detectives bring Pamela back into the station, this time to confront her with her lies.
With no other leads and no other suspects, they hope to pry a confession out of her.
Why did you lie to us about the affair?
Because it was over. My husband just died, and I didn't see any reason for airing out our dirty laundry.
The detectives also pressed Pamela about the $1 million insurance policy.
Well, why did you increase the insurance policy?
That was not my idea.
She said this is something that they did jointly.
Still, the detectives keep pressing.
They questioned her for hours.
Come on, Pam. You did it. And then you tried to make it look like a break-in.
Detective, I would never hurt Ricky.
She stuck to her story that this was actually a home invasion.
But the fact that Pamela won't crack makes no difference to detectives.
At the end of the interview, they placed Pam under arrest for murder.
There were just too many inconsistencies in her version of events for detectives to ignore.
News of Pam's arrest stuns the couple's neighbors.
This appeared to be a perfect couple.
It was really hard for people to wrap their mind around the fact that Pam could do something so heinous.
But as you started to hear about affairs and you started to hear about skimming, some people thought, could she have done it?
When the case goes to trial in June of 2014, the prosecutors begin by arguing that Pamela was the only person with a clear motive to kill her husband.
A pending divorce, a life insurance policy of more than $1 million. They said that was the motive for murder.
They maintained that Pamela Ballin was a woman who was looking to get out of a marriage that she was no longer happy in. The fact that she'd had an affair, and that she would get the spoils of the business if her husband was no longer around.
So, according to the prosecutors, Pamela had killed her husband in cold blood.
Prosecutors alleged that Ricky was asleep in his recliner on the first floor of the couple's home.
Pam crept up as he slept.
She was armed with a statue she grabbed off a nearby table.
There was no struggle. Ricky was incapacitated after the first blow.
Once he was down, she dragged her dying husband into the foyer.
Then, as her husband lay dying in the foyer, Pamela faked a home invasion.
They were painting a good picture for the jury that this was a scene that appeared to be staged.
Prosecutors focused on the fact that while the house appeared to be ransacked, no valuables seemed to, and there was very little damage to any of their possessions.
The stage set. Prosecutors claimed that Pamela had cleaned herself and then placed a carefully rehearsed call to 911.
She proceeded to give the performance of a lifetime.
When it's the defense's turn, Pamela's attorney claims that the prosecution's case is pure speculation.
Prosecution's theory sounded good, but they had no real proof.
There was simply no evidence to indicate that these two individuals were at the cusp of a divorce, and certainly no divorce that was pending at the time, and no evidence to support that assertion other than some hearsay.
What you working on, eh?
The defense also pushes back on the notion that Pamela was after Ricky's money.
They called an accountant to the stand, and he said he viewed the books, and he found no evidence that Pam had been skimming money from the company.
Pamela wasn't taking any money from the business wasn't losing any money. There was simply nothing to support that assertion. And that's all it was an assertion. You know, there were statements given by folks who thought that this was the reason that Pamela and Ricky were not getting along, and there simply wasn't any evidence to support it. And the books, the paperwork, and the testimony of the accountant himself disproved that.
Most of all, according to the defense, the prosecution's entire theory was based on a false assumption.
The most devastating blow to the prosecutor's case is when the defense brought the insurance agent to the stand
The insurance agent testified that he was the person who had actually suggested that the policy be increased. They could have gotten more coverage under a different policy, and it made sense to him, and it ultimately made sense to Pamela and to Ricky, who agreed to have the policy increased. So this theory that this was a murder for insurance money just didn't really hold any water.
In fact, the defense is so confident that they destroy the prosecution's arguments that they ask the judge to dismiss the case.
It's called a directed verdict of acquittal.
In a shocking blow to the prosecution, the judge decides to consider it.
He said, I'm going to take it under advisement.
But not before he hears the jury's verdict first.
He wanted the case to go to the jury.
After the jury made their decision, the judge would decide whether to accept the verdict or throw it out.
So we don't believe there's enough evidence for this case to even go to the jury. Now, we asked for it to be dismissed. The judge didn't do it. He didn't rule on it. He said, I'm going to hold off on ruling on that, which is very odd. Now, my opinion, having practiced for 20-some-odd years, is that the judge thought that she was going to be acquitted. And he didn't want to be the one to make the decision. He wanted the jury to go ahead and acquit her.
"53-year-old Pamela Ballin's murder trial has just taken an unprecedented turn."
Pam had been accused of killing her husband, Ricky, in order to collect his $1 million life insurance policy.
The defense was so sure the prosecution had not proved its case, they asked the judge to throw out the charges.
The judge decided to wait and to defer to the jury's ruling before he made any decisions.
When they heard his decision, the defense and Pamela's family thought that the judge was expecting an acquittal.
Would they be mistaken?
After a significant amount of deliberation, the jury came back and they found Pamela guilty.
Pam's family was totally blindsided and could not understand how the jury arrived at that decision.
On the other hand, Ricky's family and supporters were very pleased with the jury's decision. They thought they got it right.
Now the question is whether the judge will abide by their decision.
He still had the option of throwing out the case and the guilty verdict.
When the jury came back and found her guilty, he was just as surprised as we were.
Although it became apparent that he was in no hurry to make his decision.
The judge decided he needed a month to decide whether or not to toss out the case.
I honestly believe that the court simply thought that the jury got it wrong, notwithstanding the jury verdict, and set Pamela free. The court allowed Miss Ballin to go home.
Pam was released on bond and would remain free until the judge came back with a decision.
This time, it's Ricky's family who were blindsided and outraged.
It's just a slap in the face for the whole family.
She walked out the courtroom just like we did. I feel like he was just killed all over again. That's how I felt, because we didn't get justice.
Ricky's family gave interviews to the television news reporters, proclaiming how the judge had allowed a murderer to go free.
As far as they were concerned, Pamela shouldn't be out walking the streets.
The prosecutors are just as livid.
The DA is so upset by this that in just a few days, he's able to make a motion to have Pam brought back into custody pending the judge's decision on the motion.
There was so much commotion, there was so much made of it, that ultimately the judge had Miss Ballin come back in.
But would she soon be out again? It all comes down to the judge's decision.
Pam's family, friends, and attorney are all confident that Pam will be freed once the judge makes his ruling. But it's their turn to be outraged once again when the judge affirms the jury's verdict of murder.
The judge ultimately sentenced her on a murder charge.
And since she was found guilty of murder, there was only one sentence the judge can hand down.
Georgia doesn't have degrees of murder. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison.
The outcome is a startling reversal for Pamela and her family, one they refuse to accept.
We filed an appeal. We filed what's called a motion for new trial. Another judge looked at that motion for new trial and decided that there were irregularities, that she had not been fairly tried, and the case was overturned.
She was granted a new trial in 2017.
At this point, the prosecution knows what the defense's arguments are. And so they tried a different case. It was a more emotional case. Pamela testified, whereas she did not in the first trial. Ultimately, I believe the jury made their decision in that second trial upon whether they found Pamela to be credible or not. I don't believe they did. And that second jury found her guilty.
For Ricky's family, it was a hard-earned victory.
The right person is behind bars. The right person was implicated for his murder.
Meanwhile, Pamela's supporters remain just as convinced she has suffered a great injustice.
You're never going to be able to convince me that Pamela Ballin murdered Ricky Ballin.
Although no matter who killed Pamela's husband, there's one thing everyone agrees on.
Ricky did not deserve to die this way.
This was a loving father, a man who people said was universally admired for his hard work. Starting from nothing, he made the American dream come true, only to lose it in the most horrible way.
It's really an all-around tragedy for everybody involved.
Bill Anderson and Robert Shaw. Kratz needed new money. The BFA had become a classic Ponzi scheme, wrapped in the swaddling clothes of the gospel. Every sermon preached by Kratz was a sales pitch. Every hymn sung in the foundation's hallways was a distraction from the growing rot in the ledgers. As the debt grew, the lies had to become more elaborate, more biblical. Chapter 3, The Whistleblower's Burden. Kyle Tresh arrived in Phoenix in 1994 with a law degree and a heart full of idealism. The son of a preacher from Tulsa, Kyle wanted his career to mean something. Working for the BFA seemed like the ultimate synthesis of his skills and his soul. The morale was wonderful. Kyle remembered. We started every Monday with prayer. We thought we were the good guys. We thought we were the financial arm of God. But as an attorney for the foundation, Kyle began to see the cracks. He saw the complex transactions between BFA and ALO. He saw Benefactor B, an entity that owed the foundation $70 million but had no assets. He saw the accountants sweating over ledgers that didn't add up. The atmosphere in the office began to change. The prayers felt hollower, the smiles more forced. In April 1996, Kyle and for staff accountants reached their breaking point. They requested a meeting with Bill Kratz and his right-hand man, Tom Grabinski. The air in the conference room was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and mounting dread. Kyle laid out the evidence on the mahogany table. This isn't a strategy, Bill. It's a deception. You're telling people we're profitable while we're hemorrhaging millions. ALO is stone broke. If the investors knew the truth, they'd pull their money tomorrow and the whole thing would collapse. We are lying to the faithful. Kratz didn't flinch. He looked at Kyle with the practiced patience of a shepherd dealing with a stray lamb. You're looking at the numbers, Kyle, but you're not looking at the vision. These are long-term assets. We are in a workout situation. We just need to keep the balls in the air until the market returns. Do you want to be the one to tell 11,000 seniors that their church failed them? Do you want to be the one to destroy their faith? I want to be the one who tells them the truth. Kyle replied, his voice firm despite the shaking in his hands. Kyle Tresh resigned that day. He wrote a scathing letter accusing them of fraud. But the BFAS prestige was an armor. Kratz dismissed the warnings as attacks from Satan, a spiritual warfare tactic that effectively silenced many internal critics. The faithful continued to pour their life savings into the void, believing they were fighting a holy war against secular skepticism. Chapter 4, The Sentinel of the Books. While the BFA was fighting off internal dissent, an outside force was beginning to stir. Dee Grebel, a Phoenix area CPA with a reputation for being relentless, received a call from a worried client in January 1998. They want me to mortgage my house to buy more BFA certificates, the client told her. They said it's the safest investment in the world. They said I'm doing the Lord's work. Dee began to dig. She pulled the BFAS audited financial statements audited by Arthur Andersen, the most prestigious firm in the world. On the surface, it looked clean. But Dee's eyes were trained to see the shadows. She saw the notes receivable from benefactor B. She went to the Corporation Commission and pulled the public records for Allo. When she saw the balance sheet, she nearly fell out of her chair. ALO had a negative net worth of over $100 million. It was a black hole disguised as a benefactor. It was a bad bank designed to swallow failure. They're broke, she told a colleague, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and shock. They are totally, completely broke. This entire foundation is a fraud. It's a house of cards built on the backs of old people who just want to do good. Dee called Arthur Andersen 3 times. You must withdraw your audit opinion, she warned their lead auditors. The BFA is a fraud. Allo is worthless. If you don't act, you are complicit in the destruction of thousands of lives. Her calls went unreturned. The prestigious firm, perhaps blinded by their own million-dollar fees or the BFAS impeccable religious reputation, issued another clean bill of health. Armed with this clean audit, Kratz raised another $200 million from unsuspecting Christians in the final months of the foundation's existence. It was a tragedy of professional negligence. Chapter 5, The Bitter Harvest. The end came not with a bang, but with a series of investigative articles by Terry Green Sterling in the Phoenix New Times. She pieced together the money trail that Kyle Tresh and Dee Grebel had identified. She interviewed the whistleblowers, mapped the sham sales to Allo, and exposed the mirage of righteousness. In August 1999, the state of Arizona finally pulled the plug. They issued a cease and desist order. The bankruptcy was a massacre. Nearly $600 million, the life's work of 11,000 families, was gone. The assets were estimated at less than half of what was owed. The aftermath was devastating. Bill Anderson, the man who had survived a plant floor for 40 years, couldn't survive the guilt of losing his wife's security. He worked himself to exhaustion in his garage, carving Uncle Sam lawn ornaments late into the night, trying to claw back a few dollars. The heart attacks followed in quick succession. He was worrying himself to death, Pat said, her voice breaking as she watched him from the kitchen window. He thought it was his fault for trusting them. He couldn't look me in the eye. He felt he'd failed his duty as a husband and a believer. Robert Shaw had to sell his house. To pay for his daughter's tuition, the former car salesman took a job washing cars at a rental agency. He stood in the blistering Phoenix heat, scrubbing suds off hubcaps, his mind replaying the sermons of Bill Kratz. Every drop of water on the pavement felt like a wasted prayer. I didn't just lose money, Robert said, his hands chapped and red. I lost my relationship with God. I look at a steeple now, and all I see is a $sign and a lie. They took my soul along with my savings. They turned my salvation into a scam. Part 2, The Doctor's Shadow. Chapter 6, The Foot Doctor of Chicago. 2,000 miles away, in the gray, windy streets of Chicago, another predator was using trust as a weapon. Dr. Ronald Michos was a podiatrist who understood that in the world of medicine, friendship was the best way to hide a crime. Michos specialized in the elderly. He made house calls to nursing homes and private bungalows where the air smelled of mothballs and medicine. He was the kind of doctor who would stay for tea, ask about the cat, and bring a sandwich for a lonely widow. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly tireless. He made his patients feel like they weren't just a number. He was also billing Medicare for hundreds of phantom surgeries. He would bill for 3 surgeries on the same toe in a single month, investigator Pete Tyler noted as he reviewed the stacks of invoices. It was anatomically impossible. You can't operate on a foot that many times without leaving it a mess of scar tissue. But when we looked at the patients, there were no scars, just smooth skin and a lot of lies. Over 7 years, Michos siphoned $1.7 million from the system. He targeted the most vulnerable, those with terminal cancer, those with dementia, who couldn't remember what he did during his visits. To them, he was a saint who visited when no one else would. To the government, he was a ghost haunting the Medicare system, a parasite in a white coat. But by 1998, the ghost was leaving a trail. Tyler noticed that Michos was the highest paid podiatrist in the state. He began a review of the billings, and the glaring fraud became impossible to ignore. Chapter 7, The Downward Spiral. Behind the professional facade, Ronald Michos was unraveling. A messy divorce had stripped him of his suburban home and his sense of belonging. He had developed a dependency on prescription drugs and alcohol, a slow-motion suicide fueled by the money he was stealing. His lifestyle was expensive, and as the Medicare payments were suspended pending investigation, the walls began to close in. "I have lost everything," he wrote in a desperate, rambling letter to a friend. "The house is gone. The dog is gone. I am at the lowest and weakest point of my life. Society has discarded me like a used bandage." He was eventually forced to live in his car, a once prominent doctor reduced to sleeping in a sedan filled with empty bottles and medical files. But even as his life crumbled, his arrogance remained. He didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a victim of a Fed setup. He started coaching his patients, preying on their loyalty. "Tell them I made very tiny incisions, microsurgery," he whispered to an 80-year-old woman as he trimmed her nails. "Tell them you're happy with my work. If you don't, they'll take me away, and you'll have no one to visit you. You'll be alone again." Most of his patients, bound by a sense of loyalty to the man who brought them cookies and kindness, stayed silent. They didn't want to hurt their friend. But Joyce Brannon was different. Chapter 8, The Nurse in the Basement. Joyce Brannon was 54, a former ICU nurse with a sharp mind and a moral compass that hadn't been weathered by age or illness. She lived in the basement of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church, where she served as the caretaker. She was a woman of faith, but her faith was rooted in the truth. She had spent her life caring for the dying, and she knew the value of integrity. When Agent Renee Reyes showed her the billing record, 70 surgeries listed for her own feet, Joyce didn't just get angry, she got clinical. "Honey," she told the agent, her voice steady and clear, "I'm a nurse. I know what a surgery feels like. I know what anesthesia does. And I know what a scar looks like. This man never did a single operation on me. He just trimmed my nails and chatted about the weather. He's a thief, plain and simple." Joyce Brannon agreed to testify before the grand jury. She was the government's gold standard witness alert, professional, and absolutely incorruptible. She was the one who wouldn't be swayed by a sandwich or a sad story. Lycos knew it. He called her multiple times, his voice a mixture of pleading and veiled threats. He used the same friendship tactic that had worked for years. "I have family. Joyce, think about my children. If you testify, my life is over. Don't you care about me? You should have thought about that before you did this." "Ronald," she told him, her voice like iron, "this is wrong. I will not lie for you. Not for any price." Chapter 9, The Sunday Execution. The murder was as calculated as a medical procedure, a desperate attempt to excise the one piece of evidence that could destroy him. It was a surgery of a different kind and amputation of the truth. On a Sunday evening in 2001, after the last parishioners had left the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church and the building fell into a heavy, sacred silence, the killer entered through a side door. He knew the layout of the church. He knew Joyce would be alone in her basement apartment, likely relaxing after a long day of service. He found her sitting in her chair, facing the window. He didn't say a word. He didn't give her a chance to pray or to scream. He fired 6 shots from a .22 caliber revolver into her back and head. One shot was fired at point-blank range, a signature of cold-blooded, personal intent. He left her there, a silent witness in the shadows of the sanctuary. The discovery of her body sent shockwaves through the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sean Berkowitz, the lead prosecutor, knew immediately that this was no random act of violence. She was scheduled to testify in 3 days. Berkowitz said, looking at the crime scene photos, "This wasn't just a murder. This was a strike at the heart of the justice system. He thought he could kill the truth by killing the messenger. He was wrong." Chapter 10, The Digital Evidence and the Final Fall. The investigation into Maikos shifted into overdrive. The feds were no longer just looking for billing errors, they were looking for a killer. They searched a storage unit he had rented and found a cache of weapons and ammunition, but not the .22. Then they looked into his firearms history. They discovered a new wrinkle. 3 weeks before the murder, a domestic dispute had led police to confiscate Maikos' guns because his permit had expired. Among them was a .22 revolver. It was the perfect weapon, small, quiet, and lethal. Just 3 days before Joyce Brannon's murder, Maikos had reclaimed that .22 caliber revolver from the Skokie Police Department after renewing his permit. He had walked into the station, smiled at the officers, and walked out with the murder weapon. In his car, the same car he slept in, investigators found a shell casing. They found a box of .22 ammunition. And then they found the most damning evidence of all, his Palm Pilot. It was a chilling digital record of a premeditated hunt. Maikos had recorded the names of the FBI agents, the questions they asked his patients, and the ratings of each interview. If a patient refused to talk, the interview went well. If they talked, it went poorly. He had noted the exact Sunday service hours of Joyce's church. He had planned the execution of his star witness to save himself from a fraud charge, recording his progress like a surgeon documenting a procedure. The doctor had become a butcher. Part 3, The Day of Judgment. Chapter 11, The Longest Trial. In September 2005, the bill finally came due for the architects of the Arizona fraud. Former BFA President William Kratz and General Counsel Thomas Grabinski faced the music in the longest criminal trial in Arizona history. Over 1 million pages of evidence were presented. The courtroom was filled with the people they had betrayed. Bill Anderson sat in the front row, his heart struggling, but his resolve firm. Robert Shaw stood at the back, his arms crossed, his eyes never leaving Kratz's face. They wanted to see the man who had sold them heaven and given them hell. The prosecution laid out the evidence of a decade-long deception. They showed how pride had led these men to bury loss after loss in phantom companies. They argued that Bill Kratz couldn't admit failure to his peers because his identity as a financial genius for God was all he had. It was an ego wrapped in a Bible. The defense was outrageous, bordering on the delusional. If BFA had not been shut down, no one would have lost a penny, they argued. The real estate market would have eventually recovered, and everyone would have been made whole. The state killed the foundation, not the management. It was a fire sale, but the jury wasn't buying the what-if theology. Kratz was found guilty of fraud and illegally conducting an enterprise. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Grabinski was given 6. As they were led away in handcuffs, Bill Anderson finally felt he could breathe, though the air still tasted of ash. They made our lives a living hell, Bill said outside the courthouse. Now they can see how it feels to have their freedom taken. But they'll never know the pain of losing your faith. Chapter 12, The Shadow of the Scalpel. In Chicago, Dr. Ronald Michos faced a different kind of judgment. The trial was a grim recount of his descent from healer to murderer. The prosecution built a wall of circumstantial evidence that was impossible to climb over: the gun, the timing, the shell casing, and the chilling notes in the Palm Pilot. The jury heard how Michos had preyed on the elderly, how he had used his bedside manner to mask a $1 million scam, and finally, how he had silenced a nurse who only wanted to tell the truth. They saw the shell of a man who had traded his Hippocratic oath for a handful of silver. He was convicted of the fraud, but the murder charge carried the heaviest weight. The law in Illinois was clear about the murder of a witness. On May 5, 2005, Ronald Michos was sentenced to death. Today, he sits on death row in a federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. A man who once saved feet but ended up destroying a life in a basement sanctuary. He is a ghost of a doctor waiting for the final procedure. Chapter 13, The Echoes of Betrayal. Years have passed, but the echoes of the Baptist Foundation and the Michos trial still ring in the ears of those who survived. Charles Labosco, the patient who received kickbacks from Michos' fraud, pleaded guilty and avoided jail, only to die a year later. His legacy was one of complicity, a reminder that fraud often needs silent partners. In Arizona, the properties of the foundation were liquidated. Some investors eventually received about 70 cents on the dollar, but the math of restoration never truly added up. You couldn't refund the lost years of retirement, the broken health, or the shattered confidence in the church. I still pray, Robert Shaw said, looking at a small photo of his daughter's graduation. He had managed to pay for it, cent by cent, car wash by car wash. But I don't pray for money anymore. I pray for the strength to forgive, even if I'll never forget the faces of the men who lied in the name of God. Chapter 14, The Prison Yard Reflections. In the sterile, gray exercise yard of the federal prison, Bill Kratz often walked in circles, his eyes fixed on the distant, shimmering horizon that reminded him of the Arizona desert. He still wore his dignity like a suit that no longer fit, his shoulders square despite the weight of his 8-year sentence. To the other inmates, he was a curiosity, the man who had built a kingdom on paper and lost it to the truth. It was a workout situation, he would whisper to himself, his fingers tracing invisible ledger lines in the air. If they had just given us more time. The market was turning. God was testing us. He refused to admit that the test had been failed years ago in the secret rooms where Allah was born. He lived in a sanctuary of his own making, a fortress of denial where he was still the genius, still the shepherd, still the man who could do no wrong. He didn't see the faces of the 11,000 people he had ruined. He only saw the missed opportunities and the attacks from Satan. In another part of the country, in the high-security silence of death row, Ronald Michaels sat in a cell that smelled of bleach and cold stone. He had lost the charm, the charisma, and the sandwiches. He was a man reduced to a number, a doctor without a practice, a killer with no more witnesses to silence. He spent his days reviewing his own mental Palm Pilot, replaying the Sunday night in the church basement over and over. He didn't feel remorse for Joyce Brannon. He felt anger at the shell casing he had left behind, at the digital notes he hadn't deleted, at the permit he had renewed too late. He was a man of logic who had committed an act of pure, irrational desperation. I was a good doctor, he would tell the walls. I visited them. I cared for them. Medicare owed me that money. They were going to die anyway. The vanity that had driven his fraud was the only thing keeping him alive in the dark. He couldn't accept that he was a murderer. He was a victim of a system that didn't understand the microsurgeries of his life. Chapter 15, The Legacy of Stewardship. Back in Phoenix, the Southern Baptist Convention had changed. The steeples were still there, but the word stewardship was now spoken with a cautious, almost fearful tone. The trust that had been the foundation of the community was now a fragile, repaired thing, full of scars and reminders of the BFAS collapse. The Pope was in prison, but the ruins of his temple remained. The nursing homes that were never built, the food banks that received only a fraction of what was promised, they were the invisible monuments to the altar of greed. Pat Anderson eventually found peace, though her husband Bill never quite recovered his full strength before his heart finally gave out for the third and last time. She lived in a small apartment, surrounded by the Uncle Sam lawn ornaments he had carved in his final, desperate months. They were her most precious possessions, far more valuable than the 10% interest checks that had turned to ash. He died believing he'd failed me, she said to her pastor one Sunday morning. But the only ones who failed were the ones who forgot that you can't build the kingdom on a lie. Robert Shaw eventually moved back to a small house, far from the one he had lost. He still washed cars occasionally, the rhythm of the suds and the water providing a kind of meditative penance. He had found a new church, a modest, non-denominational one, where the pastor didn't wear expensive suits and the brochures didn't talk about investment opportunities. I don't look for Moses anymore, Robert said, watching his daughter receive her diploma, a ceremony paid for with honest, backbreaking labor. I just look for the truth. It's the only thing that actually sets you free. Epilogue, the weight of the truth. The Arizona sun still bakes the Phoenix asphalt, and the wind still howls through the Chicago neighborhoods. The buildings remain, but the lives inside them have been permanently altered. The scars of the altar of greed are hidden but deep, woven into the fabric of the communities that were targeted by men who claimed to serve a higher purpose. In Chicago, Joyce Brannon's name is spoken with reverence in the halls of justice. She is the benchmark for civic courage, the reminder that a single, honest voice can bring down $1 million empire of deceit. She is the saint of the basement sanctuary, the nurse who cared more for the truth than for her own safety. Bill Kratz and Ronald Michos both thought they could outrun the truth by using the language of faith and medicine. They both thought that their titles attorney, president, doctor would protect them from their deeds. But in the end, the ledgers were balanced, and the truth, though heavy and bitter, was the only thing that remained standing. In the silence of the church basements and the high-rise offices, the lesson remains. When you take a person's faith, you take more than their money, you take their world. And for that, there is no interest rate high enough to pay the debt. The altar of greed is always hungry, but in the end, it only consumes the ones who built it. The end. The alchemy of ink. The rise and fall of the H to H38 empire. A novel based on the true account of Albert Talton. Prologue, The Specimen Vault. In the heart of Washington, D.C., there is a room that does not exist on any public map of the city. It is a place where history is measured in cotton, linen, and the scent of chemical ink. They call it the Specimen Vault. Behind several layers of biometric security and armed guards, the walls are lined with floor-to-ceiling steel drawers, each containing the shattered dreams of thousands of men who thought they could outsmart the United States Treasury. Kelly Harris, a forensic expert with eyes sharpened by decades of looking at things most people ignore, pulled open a heavy drawer. The air inside the room was climate-controlled, preserving the evidence of a century of greed. Inside lay a $100 bill, pinned to a velvet backing. To the untrained eye, it was Benjamin Franklin staring back with his usual stoic wisdom. But to Kelly, it was a ghost. This one was different. She whispered, her voice echoing against the sterile walls. In the long history of counterfeiting, a crime as old as the nation itself, most forgeries were the work of master engravers or desperate men with offset presses that weighed tons. But this bill, part of the notorious H to H38 strain, was the product of a quiet revolution. It wasn't born in a high-tech lab or a foreign basement. It was born in a townhouse in Lawndale, California, birthed by a man who saw the American dream not as a goal to be earned, but as a code to be hacked. This is the story of Albert Talton, a man who turned hairspray into gold and newsprint into an empire, only to watch it all burn under the relentless gaze of the law. Chapter 1, The Engineer of Inglewood. Albert Talton was never a man of small ambitions. Growing up in Inglewood, California, in the late 70s and 80s, the air was often thick with the scent of jet fuel from lax, and the underlying tension of a neighborhood where making it usually meant surviving until Friday. Inglewood was a place of deep contrast tree-lined streets, with well-kept lawns shadowed by the reputation of Inglewood, always up to no good. Albert was the outlier. While the other kids were looking for trouble on the street corners or joining the burgeoning gang culture of Los Angeles, Albert was in his garage, surrounded by wires, circuit boards, and the smell of solder. He had the hands of a surgeon and the mind of an electrical engineer. He didn't just play music. He wanted to understand why the bass from a Bose speaker felt like a physical heartbeat against the chest. One afternoon, his friend David Goldberg watched in awe as Albert disassembled a high-end Bose radio he had acquired. "What are you doing?" "Al, that's a $300 system," Goldberg said, leaning against the cluttered workbench. Albert didn't look up. His soldering iron hissed against a circuit board, a small plume of blue smoke rising into the air. "They're charging for the name." "Dave, I want to see the math. I want to know how they get that much air to move in such a small box. It's an acoustic waveguide. It's just geometry and physics. If I can replicate the geometry, I can replicate the sound." Within a week, Albert hadn't just fixed the speaker, he had replicated its internal waveguide using scrap plastic, wood, and his own calculations. He built a car stereo system from scratch that hit harder and cleaner than anything sold in a showroom. It was his first taste of the copycat high, the realization that with enough patience and attention to detail, the world's most expensive secrets were just puzzles waiting to be solved. But the legitimate path was slow and frustrating. After high school, Albert enrolled in electrical engineering courses, but the academic pace felt like a crawl. College was a grind of theories, debt, and professors who didn't understand his practical genius. He dropped out, his brilliance untethered from a degree. He began doing dirt, the local slang for the hustle. He realized that the same mind that could decode a Bose speaker could decode a financial document. He forged checks, a crime that landed him in a cell in the 90s. He committed bank fraud in 2001. Each time he went away, he didn't learn to stop. He learned how not to get caught next time. By 2004, Albert Talton was 41 years old, a two-time felon working at a body shop. He was a man with a Ferrari brain stuck in a Hyundai Life, sanding down fenders and mixing paint for customers who didn't know his name. Chapter 2, The Kitchen Laboratory. The startup cost of the greatest digital counterfeiting operation in American history was less than $200. Albert went to a nearby Staples. He didn't buy a printing press or professional engraving tools. He bought a Hewlett-Packard all-in-one printer-scanner-copier. He set it up in his kitchen in his townhouse, the fluorescent light humming overhead like a digital cicada. He laid a genuine $100 bill on the glass. The scanner light crawled across the paper like a blue laser, digitizing Benjamin Franklin into millions of pixels. The first few dozen attempts were embarrassing failures. The colors were saturated, the lines were muddy, and the paper felt like exactly what it was: cheap office supply stock. U.S. currency isn't paper, Albert muttered to himself, his eyes bloodshot from staring at a monitor late into the night. It's cloth, 75% cotton, 25% linen. You can't print cloth on a laser jet. The ink just sits there, laughing at you. He began a period of intense research. He discovered that certain types of recycled newsprint had a high fiber content that, when treated and pressed, mimicked the unique snap and feel of a real bill. But the ink was the problem. Albert's breakthrough was a technique he called the glue and fold. He realized that if he printed the front of the bill on one ultra-thin sheet of newsprint and the back on another, he could hide the security features in the middle, like a sandwich. He began sketching the watermark by hand with a diluted white ink on the inside of the paper before gluing the two halves together. For the security thread, he used a thin strip of silver polyester film with USA 100 microprinted on it. When bonded with a specialized industrial adhesive, the security features were embedded inside the bill. But there was one final hurdle. The pen. Iodine-based ink reacted with the starch found in wood-based paper, turning black. Albert found the secret in the beauty aisle: Aquanet hairspray. Specifically, the super extra hold version. It created a microscopic, starch-free barrier that prevented the iodine in the pen from reacting with the wood fibers. Chapter 3. The First Transaction. Albert didn't want to rely on faith. He needed proof. On a humid Tuesday evening, with a single H to H3 $800 bill tucked into his wallet, Albert drove to a liquor store 3 towns over. His heart was a steady hammer against his ribs. He chose a bottle of mid-shelf whiskey, something common, and brought it to the counter. The clerk, a man whose face was etched with the boredom of 1,000 shifts, rang it up. $22.50. Albert handed over the bill. His eyes didn't move from the clerk's hand. The clerk pulled a yellow detection pen from behind his ear and ran it across Franklin's forehead. Albert held his breath. The line stayed a pale, translucent amber. "Your change," the clerk said, handing back $77.50 in real, government-issued currency. Albert walked out of the store into the cool night air, the whiskey heavy in the bag. He didn't even want the drink. He wanted the $77. He had just turned a fraction of a cent's worth of newsprint and a mist of hairspray into $77 of real freedom. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his kitchen, the blue light of the monitor illuminating his face, and he started to dream bigger than Inglewood had ever allowed. Chapter 4, The Shadow Market. As the Lawndale Mint began its first full-scale production, Albert realized that making the money was only half the battle. Moving it was where the real danger lay. He needed a buffer. He summoned Troy Stroud to his townhouse. Stroud was a man of the streets. "I don't want to see this money being spent in Lawndale, Troy," Albert said, sliding a fresh stack of hundreds across the coffee table. "This isn't for the corner stores around here. This is for the big chains. Target, Walmart, Macy's." Stroud picked up a bill and snapped it between his fingers. The sound was a sharp, satisfying crack. "It feels right, Al." They built a pyramid. At the top were Talton, Stroud, and McCory. Below them were the brokers and men who bought the bills in bulk. These brokers then sold smaller packs to the passers. By 2006, the system was a well-oiled machine. The H to H38 bills were flowing into the registers of Southern California. Albert began to see the fruits of his labor. He wasn't sanding fenders anymore. He was a king in a kingdom of paper and ink. Chapter 5, The Invisible Empire. The true strength of Albert's operation lay in its anonymity. In the drug-infested corners of South Central and the gang turfs of East L.A., the H to H38 notes became a secondary currency. Gang members who usually dealt in cocaine or heroin found that selling counterfeit cash was cleaner. There were no bodies to dispose of, no rival territories to defend with gunfire, just a steady stream of funny money that felt indistinguishable from the real thing. "It's better than the white powder. Man," a lower-level distributor told Troy Stroud during a midnight meeting at a car wash. "The feds look for drugs. They look for bodies. They don't look for a guy buying a Big Mac with a crisp 100. But the gang involvement brought a different kind of risk, the risk of silence. Gang members didn't talk to the police. They had a code. If someone was caught with a fake bill, they took the rap. They told stories about selling a car or getting paid for an odd job in cash." Albert watched from his distance, fascinated by how his invention was reshaping the local criminal economy. He wasn't just a counterfeiter anymore. He was a central banker for the underground. He began to feel a sense of godlike detachment. He was the one who decided how much wealth flowed into the streets of L.A. "I'm stabilizing the neighborhood, Paul," Albert said to McCory one evening as they watched the sunset from the balcony of a new apartment. "I'm giving people a way to survive without the violence. I'm the ghost in the machine." McCory looked at him, worried. "The ghost usually gets caught when the machine breaks down. Al, we're moving too much. We're making too much noise." Chapter 6, The Mechanics of Betrayal. David Goldberg wasn't a criminal by nature. He was a friend who had seen a chance to pay his bills. But as the months turned into years, the smell of the ink started to make him sick. One night, Goldberg stood in Albert's garage, watching the money dry. It hung from clips like ghostly linen, hundreds of Franklins staring at him with accusing eyes. He thought about his children. He thought about the fact that every time he walked into Albert's house, he was committing a federal crime that carried decades in a cage. We should slow down, Al, David said, his voice barely a whisper over the hum of the printers. Slow down. Albert laughed, his eyes fixed on a computer screen. The demand is at an all-time high. Dave, Stroud wants $500,000 by Friday. We aren't slowing down. We're scaling up. David looked at his hands. They were permanently stained with black ink around the cuticles. He realized then that he wasn't Albert's partner. He was just another component in the machine. And components, he knew, were replaceable. Chapter 7, The Woodland Hills Mirage. Success didn't just change Albert's bank account. It changed his reality. He began to live a life that was a carefully constructed mirage, a suburban dream funded by a secret factory of lies. He moved Allison Sewell into a sprawling home in Woodland Hills. To the neighbors, they were a successful, upwardly mobile couple. Albert would arrive in his silver Aston Martin Vantage, the engines growl a symphony of status. He wore designer clothes that hid the ink stains on his fingertips. But inside the house, the tension was rising. Allison saw the cars, the 7 flat-screen TVs, and the bags of designer clothes, but she also saw the shadow in Albert's eyes. He was always calculating, always listening for a siren that hadn't come yet. Where is it really coming from? Al, she asked one night, looking out over the manicured lawn. You say it's consulting, but you're always in that garage or at that townhouse in Lawndale. You're never actually at an office. I told you, baby, I'm building something, Albert said, sipping a glass of expensive cognac. I'm solving a problem that the government couldn't solve. I'm making sure we never have to worry about a 9-to-5 again. It feels like we're living in a glass house, she whispered. Albert didn't respond. He was thinking about the next batch of 20s. He was thinking about the Staples reward card and how close he was to his next free ink cartridge. He didn't see the glass house. He only saw the view. Chapter 8. The human cost Maria's bodega. While Albert was enjoying the spoils in Woodland Hills, the ripple effect of his innovation was hitting the streets in a far more brutal way. Maria, a 60-year-old grandmother, ran a small bodega in East L.A. Her profit margins were razor-thin, measured in cents on gallons of milk and packs of cigarettes. One Tuesday afternoon, a young man in a hooded sweatshirt bought a $20 phone card and a soda using a crisp $100 bill. Maria did what she always did. She took out her detection pen and ran it across the note. The line stayed a bright, reassuring amber. She handed the young man $85 in genuine change money she had earned through 12 hours of standing on her feet. On Friday, Maria went to the bank to pay her rent. The teller fed the $100 bill into a high-speed counting machine. The machine made a sharp, stuttering sound and spat the bill back out. "I'm sorry, Maria," the teller said, her voice full of practiced sympathy. "This bill is counterfeit. It's part of that H2H38 strain we'd been seeing. But the pen said it was good." Maria stammered, her heart sinking. "They've found a way to trick the pens. I have to confiscate this. I can't give you credit for it." Maria walked out of the bank, $85 poorer and $100 short on her rent. To Albert Talton, that 100 was just a piece of newsprint and a few cents of ink. To Maria, it was the difference between keeping her lights on and sitting in the dark. The alchemist wasn't just copying money, he was stealing time and survival from the people least able to afford the loss. Chapter 9, The Cold Trail. For the Secret Service, 2007 was the year of the Cold Trail. Special Agent Matthew Mayo was drowning in red pins on his map. The H2H38 strain was appearing everywhere, not just in LA, but in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and even as far east as New York. "It's a ghost operation," Mayo told his supervisor. "We arrest the passers. They say they found it. We arrest the street dealers. They say they bought it from a guy in a mask at a park. No one knows the printer. It's like the money is falling from the sky." Mayo spent night after night in the evidence room, staring at the enlarged images of the bills. He looked for a flaw, a singular imperfection that could serve as a digital fingerprint. But the alchemist was too careful. Every bill was a perfect copy of the one before it. "He's not changing the plates," Mayo realized. "He's using the same source file, H2H38. He's so confident in the quality that he doesn't think the serial number matters." This arrogance was the first crack in the wall. Mayo knew that if he could find the pattern in the distribution where the bills were appearing first each week, he could find the center of the spider web. But Los Angeles was a big web, and the spider was staying deep in the shadows. Chapter 10, The Global Bleed. By early 2008, the Lawndale Mint had gone international. A stack of H2H3800s had been seized at an exchange booth in London's Heathrow Airport. Another batch turned up in a casino in Macau. In Washington, D.C., the Treasury Department was growing frantic. The stability of the U.S. dollar relied on the world's faith that it couldn't be faked. If a man in a California townhouse could replicate the security features of the world's reserve currency with off-the-shelf parts, that faith was in jeopardy. "We aren't just looking for a criminal anymore," Kelly Harris said during a high-level briefing. "We're looking for a systemic threat. This isn't one guy with a scanner. This is a factory that is devaluing the currency of the United States." The pressure on Agent Mayo doubled overnight. The mandate was clear. Shut down the H2H38 operation, or the global economy would start asking questions the Treasury didn't want to answer. Chapter 11, The Forensic Maze. In the specimen vault in D.C., Kelly Harris was beginning to notice a pattern that would haunt her for the next 2 years. "It's the serial numbers," she said to an intern. Most digital counterfeiters are sloppy, but this guy